Hi, Gary Stearman coming to you from the studios of Prophecy Watchers with today's special guest, Bill Salus. Hi, Bill.
Hey, Gary, it's great to be here and to do another update. I look forward to this.
And in this update, we're going to talk about the next prophecies. That's the title of this DVD. And Bill, when you lecture, you use two words a lot. One of them is now, and the other is next. And you have the now prophecies and the next prophecies, which I think is a pretty good way of understanding the flow of Bible prophecy.
Right. The next prophecies is a sequel to the now prophecies, and we're looking at how are these end times prophecies going to sequence themselves out.
Yeah.
The now prophecies would be prophecies that could actually happen at the present time. They lack preconditions. We could wake up tomorrow and they could find fulfillment. Like, for instance, nothing stands between the destruction of Damascus and Isaiah 17. There's no real preconditions there.
Right.
Matter of fact, a lot of us are watching for that on the radar closely. There's several of the now prophecies in the Now Prophecies book and DVD. The next prophecies have a few preconditions. They're stage setting, but they kind of wait in line for the now prophecies to find fulfillment. So, for instance, Ezekiel 38, in my estimation, is drawing near, but it's not now, it's next, because it pictures Israel dwelling securely without walls, bars, nor gates, etc. And that's not happening at the present time. After events happen, Israel takes care of its enemies, I believe in Psalm 83 and Isaiah 17 and stuff, as now prophecies. They could dwell securely, they could take down the walls. So the next prophecies have some preconditions.
Now, let's talk about prophecies in Israel that will take place before the tribulation. 7-year tribulation has a very discreet opening, and when the Lamb opens the first seal, you've got 7 years being ticked off in sequential order, very well laid out. But before that happens, there's a lot of prophecy yet to be fulfilled.
Well, there are, and there's so many we won't have time in this update to talk about, like the destruction of Damascus in Isaiah 17. I put forward reasons why that's a pre-tribulation event. Jeremiah 49, verses 34 through 39, Elam, dealing with Iran. Mm-hmm. There's a disaster that occurs there that is also covered in these books. There's several others. I believe Psalm 83 and Ezekiel 38 are also pre-tribulation events. I believe Psalm 83 must happen before the tribulation. It's a concluding Arab-Israeli war. When you look at that prophecy, it talks about the Israeli defense forces defeating their Arab enemies. And the only time that could really happen would be prior to the tribulation, because when you understand the 7-year tribulation, the first 3.5 years, Israel's not at war. They're in a pseudo-peace with this false covenant that gets confirmed by the Antichrist. Then in the second half of the tribulation, even Jesus tells them in Matthew 24:15, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel, when the Antichrist goes into the temple at that time, the Jews are instructed by Christ to flee. So they're not fighting. And this is not going to happen in the Messianic kingdom, the war with Israel and their Arab neighbors of Psalm 83, pre-tribulation event. What about Ezekiel 38, the timing of Ezekiel 38? There's all kinds of different views on that, Gary. Should we talk about the timing of that?
Well, before we get to Ezekiel 38, I would just like to point out that Israel is at war right now. I'm not sure it's an official declared war, but you have flare-ups every 3, 4, 5 days between Israel and the Palestinians in Gaza. And there's a huge wall. How long is that wall?
Well, there's several walls, so I'm not exactly sure which one. There's a 403-mile wall, partition wall, that goes down the center of Israel. At some points, 20 feet high, filled with concrete. There's about a 29 or 30-foot wall on the northern border of Israel that they're just finishing, along with other walls in north by Metula. So those are the concrete walls there to prevent infiltration from Hezbollah, who has recently put tunnels underneath. Israel's uncovering tunnels from Hezbollah, just like the Hamas had tunnels going in out of the Gaza. Hezbollah has tunnels coming in underneath from Lebanon into northern Israel. So you're right.
There will be a time, according to the Bible, when Israel doesn't have walls or gates, meaning that Israel has somehow either defeated the enemies in the surrounding territories, or they've come to some kind of an agreement, and those walls have been taken down.
Yeah, Ezekiel 38, verses 7 through 13, talks about an Israel that's dwelling securely, without walls, bars, nor gates, a peaceable people. Right now, those walls are not aesthetically pleasing. They are there not to keep tourists in, but to keep infiltrators out.
Yeah.
So they will easily come down, and you can literally interpret Ezekiel 38 and 39 all the way, all 52 verses, very literally, and those are legitimately talking about walls, bars, and gates.
Very interesting. Now, to use Bill's word, now, certain things can happen. But there are other things that will happen next, which can't happen yet, right?
Oh, yeah, so the greatest example is the mark of the beast, the Antichrist. He doesn't even do that. We don't find that implemented until the middle of the tribulation, right? So I actually call that a last prophecy. In other words, it's even beyond with more preconditions. But next, for instance, like Ezekiel 38, we talked about some of those preconditions. A harlot world religion, Mystery Babylon, Revelation 17. Once the bride of Christ is raptured up, you have the counterfeit bride coming in, the harlot world religion and that unholy alliance with the Antichrist in Revelation 17. So that's a next
let me
prophecy.
talk about that for a moment, because this plays right into what you've been talking about. The Antichrist is given in 2 Thessalonians as standing up in the temple of God and declaring himself to be God. Well, that can't happen tomorrow because there's no temple for the Antichrist, and neither has the Antichrist been exposed yet. So those things have to be pushed back probably a few years, or maybe more than a few. And this is what you're talking about. Traditionally, these distinctions haven't been made in terms of a timeline. And what we're doing today, and what you're especially doing today, is trying to set up some kind of a timeline that is solid, that does not shift back and forth.
Exactly. And the next DVD and the next book, I do put forward that timeline, and I'm trying to emphasize this time gap that, many of our colleagues would say, yeah, there's a time gap between the rapture and the tribulation, because it's not the rapture that starts the tribulation, it's the confirmation of the false covenant by the Antichrist with Israel and the many, and that's in Daniel 9:27. Well, when does that happen? How long is that time gap? Right. And let's go into it. And, you and I were just talking pre-studio time here. You think that could even be maybe even 10 years or a long period of time.
At everything that has to happen in sequential order before the local enemies of Israel are put away, before the international enemies of Israel are put away, before the Antichrist is revealed, before the temple is built. That's going to take several years for all those things to happen.
Yeah, and so, if that gap is several years, 10 years or longer, what an amazing time on the earth. You just quoted 2 Thessalonians. Well, also in 2 Thessalonians, we find out that Satan will no longer be restrained from supernatural deception, all signs and lying wonders, as he uses that to pedestal the Antichrist. So you figure, well, hey, are we now dealing with a time in this gap where the paranormal is the new normal, the supernatural is the natural? So, don't you think the Bible would have something to say about that? So I take the viewers or the readers into that gap, and we explore what could be going on in there, and some powerful stuff. A very interesting time on the world's timeline. It
really is. Now, you might be asking, well, don't you believe in a pre-tribulation rapture? Yes, I do. In fact, I believe in a rapture far ahead of the tribulation. I believe the church has to be gone to allow the things you're talking about really to come to pass.
Yeah, I concur, and I always like to bring I'm glad you brought that up. And, we both believe in an imminent pre-trib rapture.
Absolutely.
Nothing has to happen before the rapture occurs.
Amen.
That doesn't mean some things might not happen prior, though. Right. We could have the destruction of Damascus prior to the rapture. Right. We could have Jeremiah 49's Elam prophecy prior to the rapture. I wouldn't be surprised if we did, but in no way are we saying they must happen prior to the rapture. So I just want to be clear with that.
And I think you have been clear, and what we're trying to do now, and again, I like to think of myself as encouraging the saints. That's you, and thanks for watching us. I want to be an encouragement to you, and I know Bill does too. We want to sort of take away the doubts, build up the faith, and instead of spreading discouragement like, no, this couldn't happen, that can't happen, there's doom and gloom ahead, that's not our message. Our message is Jesus is coming very soon, perhaps today, and we don't change that.
No, absolutely. And that's the exciting part about what we're dealing with, because if we're seeing all these things stage setting at the present time, then we have to know that Jesus is about to come in the midst of that or prior to all that.
Right.
And we're certainly not going to experience the wrath of God that comes out in the tribulation period. That's why we're pre-tribulation rapture believers. But the reality is we could experience some things. And we shouldn't be shocked if we do. It's not like we didn't get the memo. This is prophetic information that
Yeah.
God wanted us to possess. Things could happen now, things could happen next, and then there's things that will happen to another generation, not necessarily generation, but the people who get left behind per se.
And Bill has put in a lot of work. Again, this DVD, which we're offering, and by the way, we've done some programs which you'll be seeing in the near future with Bill Salus, and going into more detail about the next prophecies, the DVD and the book. But you'll just have to wait for those programs. They're going to be good, I promise you. We've got just a minute or so, Bill. What would you like to say in conclusion here?
Well, in the programs you alluded to, we get into the details. The DVD has 3 messages on 2 discs that are teaching messages from the Next Prophecies book. What we do in the programs is get into those details, but I also in the DVD get into the timing of very important events like Psalm 83, why it has to be a pre-tribulation event. Ezekiel 38, why it has to be a pre-tribulation event, and why it's probably after Psalm 83, because there's different arguments about the timing of Ezekiel 38. Could it be in Armageddon? There's reasons why it's not, in my estimation. Could it be in the first half of the tribulation? Remember, the Jews are burning weapons for 7 years. We got to look at those time frames. Well, we do that in the DVD and the book.
Bill, thanks for coming by. It's great.
Thank
Always
you,
great
Gary.
to talk to you.
Pleasure.
And be watching for those programs that we've done with Bill, because I think you'll be fascinated by what he has to say. I'm Gary Stearman. You keep watching. We are. Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com, where you can sign up for our free email newsletter. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.